But there was this guy, man, he was out there, he was kicking people's heads in. People called him the best wrestler in the world.
Daniel Bryan at the top of the ladder! You gotta be kidding me!
Daniel, you might not be an A, but you are a B+.
It's insane! Miracle on Bourbon Street!
It is with a heavy heart and the utmost sadness that I officially announce my retirement. Is my career over? No.
Daniel Bryan may be one of wrestling's biggest success stories. After graduating high school and going down to Texas to train with Shawn Michaels, just 1 year after his first wrestling match, he ended up signing a developmental deal with WWE in 2000. Upon signing, Bryan would start wrestling for WWE's developmental system at the time, Memphis Wrestling Championship. And this is where Bryan received training under William Regal, and also where he got the name The American Dragon, one of the coolest names of all time. A year later, WWE would sever its ties with MCW in 2001, and after only 18 months under WWE contract, Bryan got released. Years later, he went on to reveal that he was close to being in that year's Royal Rumble. The story goes that Bryan was supposed to be one of the key features in WWE's new Cruiserweight division. He then continued to work the independent scene, and in 2002, he worked a few non-contracted matches for WWE, most notably against John Cena and Rico. And 2002 was the year Bryan really began making a name for himself. Working in places like New Japan Pro Wrestling and Ring of Honor, still using the name The American Dragon, to this day Bryan is still known as one of the founding fathers of Ring of Honor. In fact, he did so much in Ring of Honor that it deserves its own separate video. But to sum it up, he didn't just create a name for himself, he created an entire legacy. The highlights being him winning every title there is to win in the promotion, not to mention his classic rivalries with future stars in the business such as Tyler Black, who would go on to be Seth Rollins, Kenny Omega, Nigel McGuinness, and I can't even stress this enough, that's not even scratching the surface. Let me know in the comments if I should break down Daniel Bryan's Ring of Honor career. I mean, the guy was everywhere. And from the year 2000 all the way to 2009, Daniel Bryan became one of the greatest independent wrestlers of all time. Which is why it was no surprise that WWE decided to re-sign him in August of 2009. And just like everything else in life, once you get to the top and decide to move on, well, you'll inevitably have to start from the bottom once more. And it was around this time he'd reconnect with William Regal while training in FCW, and Regal would give him the wrestling name Daniel Bryan. Pretty creative, right? Bryan and a group of other wrestlers with various different wrestling backgrounds would all be selected to be a part of WWE's newly debuting show, NXT. And the main premise of the show was, well, what the fuck was the original NXT? Oh, hold on, wait. It was a reality-based competition show where quote-unquote rookies competed in challenges with WWE superstars known as quote-unquote pros to earn a full-time WWE contract. Wow, I really just be watching whatever for you guys, huh? Bryan would make his television debut on the first episode of NXT, taking place on February 23rd, 2010. And his character more so seemed to be him being himself. However, commentary would sell his character as a nerd. And this was during Michael Cole's awful heel run. And for those of you who don't remember or are too young, in the incredibly vast and legendary career of Michael Cole, there was a brief period where he lost his mind and went heel. And this included him disrespecting JR, a match with Jerry Lawler at WrestleMania 27, and during this heel run, we got weeks upon months of Michael Cole glazing The Miz. And it definitely didn't help that Daniel Bryan's pro was The Miz. Bryan's first match would be against Chris Jericho, where he would lose the match and afterwards be attacked by his pro. The next week, Miz would confront Bryan once more backstage, and lets him know he has a match with Wade Barrett coming up next, which he would also lose, and then afterwards was attacked by Chris Jericho. Daniel Bryan and The Miz continued to hate each other over the next couple weeks, and it was actually during this time period where The Miz would appear on Raw and have Daniel Bryan face Batista in a Beat the Clock challenge. This was my introduction to Daniel Bryan, and I was instantly a fan because he had the knee pad and kick pad combination. Every wrestler that had that was cold to me. Batista would pick up the win in exactly 5 minutes and 6 seconds. And you guessed it, Batista would attack him after the match, hitting him with 2 more Batista bombs. The next week on Raw, Bryan would face The Miz in a one-on-one match, where he would finally pick up a win, and afterwards fight with The Miz outside the ring. This is where Daniel Bryan throws The Miz into Michael Cole, creating his #1 hater for the next 3 to 4 years. Soon after, Bryan would be eliminated from NXT alongside Michael Tarver, and afterwards he would cut a pretty sarcastic promo, pretty much hinting at his time in the indies, and teasing a possible return.
Daniel Bryan might be done, but Bryan Danielson, God knows what's gonna happen to him.
The competition concluded with Wade Barrett winning the WWE contract. And the next week on Raw, while John Cena was facing a pre-pipe bomb CM Punk, all 8 members would surround the ring and proceed to attack both John Cena and CM Punk, before proceeding to tear apart the ring, attack commentators, and this is where Daniel Bryan infamously chokes Justin Roberts with his own tie. The group would go on to call themselves the Nexus, and due to said choking of Justin Roberts, Daniel Bryan would be released from the company. It was reported that this may have caused sponsors to threaten to pull out. And though the promo he cut saying he would go back to the Independents was just a work, as he was supposed to be a part of the Nexus faction moving forward, during this time, he actually did go back to the independent scene. His first match would be in Chikara Wrestling, facing off against Eddie Kingston. He was actually putting on some really good matches around this time, debuting in IWA Puerto Rico, and the next week he returned to PWG to face Roderick Strong, and the week after that he challenged Adam Pearce for the NWA World Heavyweight Championship. Unsuccessfully, may I add. Adam Pearce got them hands. It was around this time Daniel Bryan was re-signed to WWE, although he still had some independent booking obligations that he had to fulfill, which WWE allowed. In the meantime, in WWE, the Nexus were running rampant throughout the entire company, with weekly attacks on WWE's top stars, attacking the chairman himself, and an attempted vehicular homicide on Bret Hart. By the way, it's never revealed who was driving this limo. So, kayfabe speaking, the limo driver was either scared for his life of the 7 members of Nexus, or just completely with the shits, leading to the infamous 7-on-7 elimination tag team match at SummerSlam, where WWE had the chance to put over 7 up-and-coming talents and decided to feed them to John Cena instead. The group would try to recruit The Miz to be a part of Team WWE, but I guess he didn't really feel like it at the time. So instead, Bryan would make his surprise return, being the 7th team member of Team WWE, where he would quickly eliminate Darren Young, and later in the match receive a huge pop during his comeback before eliminating Heath Slater. That's when The Miz would come back out and attack Bryan, causing him to be eliminated by Wade Barrett. And we all know the rest from here. Cena goes Super Cena after receiving a DDT on the concrete floor, and eliminates the remaining members of the Nexus. The surprise return led Bryan to be a fan favorite, and his feud with The Miz picked up right where it left off. The two would continue to attack each other over the following weeks, setting up a match at 2010's Night of Champions for the United States Championship. I was there. And this is where Daniel Bryan would pick up his first WWE title. After Miz taps out to a LeBell Lock, he would defend the title the following month at Hell in a Cell in a submission match against Miz and Morrison. And at Bragging Rights the next month, he represented Raw in a champion versus champion match versus Dolph Ziggler, where he would also pick up a win. The next month at Survivor Series, he successfully defended the title against Ted DiBiase. And aside from the Miz feud, Bryan wasn't really doing too much with the title. Around this time, and really most of the time, WWE's mid-card titles were mostly an afterthought. In late 2010, Daniel Bryan was still being represented as a nerd by an unbearable Michael Cole. And all I'm saying is, after hours of revisiting heel Michael Cole, I think I deserve a like. Actually no, give me your wallet. The Bella Twins would start competing for Bryan's affection, and you can just cut the fake sexual tension with a knife. The Bella Twins began accompanying Bryan to the ring, and over the following weeks, they'd compete in multiple mixed tag team matches. And just as one of the Bella Twins thought that they won Bryan's affection, it was revealed that he was secretly dating Gail Kim, per storyline, and she began accompanying him to the ring. Though a few good things did come from the storyline. Bryan's championship reign got extended because throughout all the nonsense he just wasn't defending it, and this storyline led to him meeting his eventual wife. On March 14, 2011, Bryan would face #1 contender Sheamus for the United States Championship, with Sheamus picking up the win and ending Bryan's title reign at 176 days. And it was reported that he was supposed to face Sheamus in a rematch at WrestleMania, but as you'll later see, the history between Daniel Bryan and Sheamus at WrestleMania is cursed. Instead, they had a lumberjack match on the pre-show. The match would end in a no contest, and the next night on Raw, Sheamus attacks Bryan, but then is interrupted by a debuting Sin Cara. A few weeks later, during the 2011 draft, Bryan was drafted to SmackDown. He debuted on the May 6th episode of SmackDown, losing to Sheamus, and afterwards, Cody Rhodes would attack him and put a bag over his head. This was undashing Cody Rhodes, and recently Rey Mysterio had broken dashing Cody Rhodes' nose, leading Cody Rhodes to have an existential crisis and begin wearing a protective face mask while also attacking people and putting paper bags over their heads. Bryan teamed up with Sin Cara to feud with Cody Rhodes and Ted DiBiase, and this feud went absolutely nowhere. For the beginning of the summer, Bryan would float around SmackDown's mid-card. It wasn't until late June where he would qualify for the Money in the Bank ladder match. And as historic as this pay-per-view was for obvious reasons, this was also the same night Daniel Bryan won the Money in the Bank contract, a move that actually ended up launching his career to the next level. Afterwards, he declared that he was going to cash in his Money in the Bank contract in the main event of next year's WrestleMania. And if you smelt what The Rock was cooking, there was no way that was going to happen. Afterwards, he would go on a serious losing streak, and later that year, he began feuding with World Heavyweight Champion Mark Henry, who was in the middle of the greatest run of his career and inducting people into the Hall of Pain every week. Something I didn't know until researching for this video, Mark Henry was actually the one that put in a good word, leading the WWE inevitably signing Daniel Bryan. Henry had a feud with Big Show brewing, and every time he attacked Daniel Bryan, Big Show would come in for the save. And one of those times, Big Show even tried to encourage Daniel Bryan to cash in his Money in the Bank contract, before Mark Henry ended up escaping. However, on the November 26, 2011 episode of SmackDown, Daniel Bryan would successfully cash in his Money in the Bank contract against Mark Henry for about a minute. Then Teddy Long comes out to revoke the title win due to Mark Henry's many injuries suffered during his battles with the Big Show. Despite this, Bryan would still win a fatal 4-way match to become the #1 contender for Mark Henry's World Heavyweight Championship. The two would face off in a steel cage match, and Mark Henry would come out with the win. Also earlier this month, Daniel Bryan begins a love story with AJ Lee. Due to Big Show's constant interference in Mark Henry's Hall of Pain inductions, the two would face off in a match at TLC and a chairs match for the World Heavyweight Championship, where Big Show would finally win the big one just to have his ally for all of a few weeks come out and cash in his Money in the Bank contract, leading to a huge pop and also leading to the birth of the Yes Movement. And this was actually a pretty big moment. Bryan and Punk were the first two from the 2000s independent scene to become main event champions in WWE, opening the door for guys like Seth Rollins and Dean Ambrose, Kevin Owens and Finn Balor down the line. The next month, in January of 2012, Bryan defended his World Heavyweight Championship 3 times. First against the Big Show, and due to Mark Henry's interference, he retained his title due to disqualification. The next week, in a no disqualification rematch, the match would abruptly end after Big Show accidentally runs into AJ, knocking her out, and Big Show proceeds to cry, causing Daniel Bryan to Karen out, followed by a slight fat shame.
She's 95 pounds! You are 500 pounds!
The third title defense was a lumberjack match against Mark Henry, but Bryan provoked the lumberjacks to interfere, causing a no contest. This all culminating in a triple threat steel cage match for the World Heavyweight Championship at the Royal Rumble. The match was pretty okay, and Bryan picks up the win after escaping the Big Show's grasp. Meanwhile, Sheamus eliminates everyone's favorite and returning Chris Jericho to become the winner of the 2012 Royal Rumble. The next month, he defended his World Heavyweight Championship inside of the Elimination Chamber, where one of the final men standing was Santino Marella, and Santino comes within milliseconds of winning the World Heavyweight Championship. And this was actually the first time someone kicked out of Santino Marella's Cobra. Sheamus would end up choosing Daniel Bryan to face at WrestleMania, and we all know how this turns out. After an 18-second match, Daniel Bryan loses the World Heavyweight Championship on the biggest stage of them all. And there's no actual legitimate reason on why the match was so short. Apparently Vince McMahon wanted to do something that nobody was expecting, and a shocking quick victory was how he wanted to do it. And this match beats the record for the quickest World Heavyweight Championship match, with number 2 now being Chavo Guerrero versus Kane. This ending Daniel Bryan's World Heavyweight Championship title reign at 105 days. After WrestleMania, Daniel Bryan started blaming AJ for his loss. He then ended their relationship in pursuit of the World Heavyweight Championship. For weeks, AJ would try to win him back, and in the meantime, Daniel Bryan would face Sheamus in a 2 out of 3 falls match at Extreme Rules the next month. And I cannot stress this fact enough. I was there. Bryan would lose the match 2-1 to Sheamus in what was probably the best match between the two. I'll give it 3 out of 5 Don Cheadles. The next night on Raw, Bryan became the #1 contender for the WWE Championship after winning a Beat the Clock challenge. This is a concept I wish they actually brought back a lot more often. It was a great way to make the entire show feel connected. This set up the match of CM Punk versus Daniel Bryan at Over the Limit, a match that truly deserved the main event, but was bumped to the mid-card for John Cena versus John Laurinaitis. Punk versus Bryan was an incredible match up until the end where there was a controversial finish. Punk would roll up Bryan while Bryan had Punk in the now named Yes Lock, and Punk would end up retaining the title. And a week before this match took place, Bryan would frame Punk for hitting Kane with a steel chair. This setting up a three-way feud between the three. However, AJ, still mad at Bryan, turns her attention to Punk and Kane in order to get back at Bryan. On the June 1st episode of Smackdown, Bryan would interfere in a match between CM Punk and Kane, causing a double disqualification and setting up a triple threat match at No Way Out. And Punk would retain his title after AJ distracted Kane. And the next week on Raw, Bryan would beat Punk and Kane in a non-titled elimination triple threat match for another WWE title shot. This match taking place at Money in the Bank, with AJ being the special guest referee. And this was by far the best match in WWE involving Daniel Bryan and CM Punk, with Punk coming out with the win. And I wasn't too big a fan of this entire storyline. I feel like when you have a guy that can cut great promos like CM Punk, and a guy that can put on great matches like Daniel Bryan, you don't really need the additional pieces like AJ and Kane. However, this storyline did shoot AJ into superstardom, and it serves as the origin story for Team Hell No. The night after Money in the Bank, Daniel Bryan would propose to AJ, which she accepted, and the wedding was set for the 1000th episode of Raw. The wedding was hosted by Jerry Lawler, and everything was going according to plan, until Vince McMahon comes out, and AJ reveals that instead of saying yes to Daniel Bryan's hand in marriage, she was actually saying yes to Vince McMahon's offer to be Raw GM. And I don't know, like, where the fuck did that come from? Then The Rock proceeds to come out, clowns Daniel Bryan, and then hits him with a rock bottom. And to add a little bit more insult to injury, infamous and disgraced Hollywood star Charlie Sheen would cut a promo on Daniel Bryan.
Tell Daniel I'm not hard to find. I'd be happy to meet him, I don't know, in the ring, in my house, his house, whatever. I'm not hiding.
And this was supposed to lead to a match between the two at SummerSlam, which in no doubt would have been a shit show, which is probably why the match didn't happen. Also, this is around the time Charlie Sheen began his downward spiral. And after being kicked off a 2.5 Man, nobody in show business would want to work with him, not even WWE. AJ continued to get her revenge by denying Daniel Bryan WWE title shots and forcing him to face Kane at SummerSlam. Bryan would win the match, but due to both of them being crash outs, AJ decided to put both of them in anger management class, taught by WWE legend Dr. Shelby, and also attended by future AEW star Scorpio Sky. Watching these segments back, they're actually pretty funny. I feel like I didn't appreciate them enough in the moment, mostly because I was rooting for Bryan to be taken more serious as a character. The next week, WWE took a Twitter poll in order to let the fans decide what Daniel Bryan and Kane would do next. Between the options of having another match, tagging together, or hugging it out, the fans overwhelmingly decided to make the two hug it out. And what I find most hilarious about this is WWE official Mike Chioda was there to officiate it all. The two would eventually hug it out before playfully slapping each other's shoulders until, you know, a brawl breaks out. The next week, the two would get a visit from Dr. Shelby, ordered by AJ, leading to the two facing off against the primetime players later that night. And Daniel Bryan and Kane would pick up the win after Kane chokeslammed Daniel Bryan onto Darren Young. And the two would continue to get weekly visits from Dr. Shelby. All of these weekly anger management classes led to the two being able to face off against R-Truth and Kofi Kingston for the tag team championships. The match would take place at Night of Champions, and after Bryan attacked Kane, throwing him off the top rope, Kane lands on Kofi Kingston, effectively pinning him for the 3 count. After the win, the team would officially start going by Team Hell No, and for the following weeks, they'd be the funniest thing on each show they were on. They would graduate from anger management class, and they began feuding with the debuting Shield. The Shield would spend weeks attacking Ryback after their initial attack during the triple threat match versus CM Punk and John Cena at Survivor Series. And in their path to destruction, Team Hell No would unfortunately become a casualty. This leading to a 6-man TLC match at the pay-per-view TLC. Ryback was actually originally scheduled to face CM Punk in a TLC match. However, CM Punk partially tore his meniscus around this time, causing him to be inserted in this feud. And this was actually the first time we got to see all 3 members of the Shield main event and really showcase what each of them bring to the table. And this match was absolutely incredible. 4 out of 5 Don Cheadles. The Shield would pick up the win after powerbombing Bryan through a table. The two would take a break from feuding with the Shield and successfully defended their titles against Team Rhodes Scholars at the Royal Rumble. A week later, Bryan would qualify for the Elimination Chamber match, this being to determine the #1 contender for the World Heavyweight Championship. And thanks to Mark Henry, Bryan was the first person eliminated. Shortly after, the two would start feuding with Dolph Ziggler and Big E Langston, leading to a match at WrestleMania 29, where Daniel Bryan and Kane would pick up the win. And on the Raw after Mania, they would reignite their feud with The Shield by saving The Undertaker from one of their attacks. The Shield at this time, and for the remainder of their run, were a pretty unstoppable group. Team Hell No would team up with The Undertaker and still lose to The Shield, And in the weeks that followed, the Shield would beat Bryan, Kane, and John Cena in both singles competition and tag team matches, leading to a match between Team Hell No and Roman Reigns and Seth Rollins. The Shield would pick up the win after a pretty good match, this ending their title reign at 245 days. Losing the tag team titles caused Bryan to be obsessed with proving that he wasn't the weak link of the group. He began getting a bit more aggressive with Kane, and this inevitably backfired. The two would lose their rematch against the Shield on the May 27th episode of Raw. And though he didn't win the tag team titles, during this time, Daniel Bryan was undeniably one of the best performers in WWE. He could obviously put on great matches, and the crowd loved him, but the thing that really put him over the top was him being in Team Hell No. This gave Bryan a chance to show off a lot of his promo skills and comedic timing. On the June 14th episode of Smackdown, Bryan, Kane, and Randy Orton would finally end the Shield's undefeated streak in a 6-man tag team match, with Bryan making Rollins tap out to the Yes Lock. This leading to the team of Daniel Bryan and Randy Orton facing Seth Rollins and Roman Reigns for the tag team championships at Payback. The Shield would come out with a win, and the next night on Raw, Orton and Bryan would face each other in a singles match. Bryan would go for an outside dive, leading to him hitting his head and receiving a stinger. The match would legitimately be called off, and Bryan was pretty pissed about the decision. It was later reported that Triple H was the one who decided to call the match off, leading to an upset Bryan going backstage and screaming at Triple H. The situation cooled down and there was no actual heat. Bryan later said that he just felt it was a bit hypocritical, considering Triple H has literally wrestled through a torn quadricep twice. Bryan would be off TV for about a month. Meanwhile, John Cena just finished his feud with Mark Henry, after Henry got the gotcha bitch moment of the year, possibly even the decade, by faking his retirement and letting John Cena know that he had a lot more in the tank. The feud would culminate at 2013 Money in the Bank. Cena would come out with the win, and following this, he was allowed to choose his next opponent at SummerSlam. This is where Cena decides to choose Daniel Bryan. The build to this match started off pretty respectful and got pretty heated in the later weeks leading up to SummerSlam. Bryan was hands down the hottest thing in the company, and even though he was getting this push, it didn't feel like he was actually being taken serious by the higher ups, leading many, including myself, to believe that he wouldn't win at SummerSlam. The match ended up being a 5 out of 5 Don Cheadle classic. In fact, the entire pay-per-view is probably one of the best SummerSlams of the decade. Daniel Bryan debuts a new finisher where he runs from one side of the ring delivering a flying knee to John Cena. Bryan pins Cena clean to the shock of many and joy of everybody watching. However, just minutes after winning the championship, Randy Orton comes down to the ring, teasing a Money in the Bank cash-in before attempting to walk away. A close call, but Bryan would end the night as WWE, oh no, a heel turn! Triple H hits Bryan with a pedigree, leading Randy Orton to cash in his Money in the Bank and begin the forming of the Authority. One of the worst storylines to live through, probably of all time. Triple H, Randy Orton, the McMahons, and sometimes The Big Show, and I can't forget Corporate Kane, would wreak havoc on the company for the next 2.5 years. It was awful. The shocking cash-in led Bryan and Randy Orton a feud over the next 3 months, with Bryan picking up the win at Night of Champions, however, it being revoked due to crooked referee Scott Armstrong counting too fast towards the end of the match. Bryan would be stripped of the title, leading to the two facing off for the vacated WWE Championship at Battleground. However, this match would end in a no contest due to a Big Show interference. This leading the feud to culminate in a Hell in a Cell match the next month, with special guest referee Shawn Michaels. The match would end in all types of shenanigans, with Triple H interfering, Bryan taking out Triple H, and Shawn Michaels taking out Bryan for taking out Triple H, leading Orton to pick up the win. By the end of this feud, Bryan was a 2-time champion with a combined reign of 1 day. Many fans expected Bryan to remain in the championship picture, however he would be pulled in a feud with the recently debuting Wyatt family. The Wyatts would spend weeks attacking Bryan, as well as CM Punk, leading to the two teaming with each other. A very brief period of time that not too many people remember, they actually went by the Best in the Beard. After weeks of singling out Bryan with attacks, he would end up folding and joining the Wyatt family, even changing his name to Daniel Wyatt. And this feud had the potential to be interesting, however the fans' desire to see Bryan in the main event took center stage, causing Bryan to leave the group just 2 weeks later, turning on Bray Wyatt after a steel cage match with the Usos. This leading to a match between Daniel Bryan and Bray Wyatt at that year's Royal Rumble. Bray Wyatt would come out with the win. The Royal Rumble match would take place later that night, and while everybody was expecting Daniel Bryan to at least make it to the final 3, he would end up not appearing in the match altogether. Fun fact, the two people to start this match was Seth Rollins and CM Punk. Batista would end up winning the match, leading to an uproar from the fans, including starting the hashtag Cancel WWE Network movement on Twitter just weeks after it debuted. This immediate backlash led to WWE having to pivot from the original plan being Batista versus Randy Orton at WrestleMania 30. And if they didn't have enough on their plate, the same night this all started was also the same night CM Punk would leave the company, tearing apart the plans of WrestleMania even more. Punk was set to face Triple H at WrestleMania, continuing to be the thorn in the Authority's side that he had always been. And it was rumored that Daniel Bryan was set off to face Sheamus once again in a WrestleMania match, thus concluding our curse counter. With the fans wanting him the most, and the company needing him the most, Daniel Bryan would step up to the plate. Despite multiple attacks from Kane and interference from The Shield, and I mean for weeks on end, Bryan and the fans would stage a ring takeover, forcing Triple H to grant him a match at WrestleMania against himself, with the winner of that match going on to be inserted into the main event, making it a triple threat match for the WWE World Heavyweight Championship. The two would face off at WrestleMania, and Bryan would come out with the win in a 3 out of 5 Don Cheadle match. And after a 4 out of 5 Don Cheadle match, including teasing that Bryan may not even finish the match, Bryan would lock in the yes lock on Batista after delivering a running knee, leading to Batista tapping out and Bryan becoming the WWE World Heavyweight Champion in the main event of WrestleMania, also earning a record of 7 Cheadles in one night. And just like that, the fans had spoken and Daniel Bryan was the new face of WWE. But unfortunately, the celebration didn't last too long. Shortly after winning the titles, Kane would attack Daniel Bryan, setting up a match between the two at Extreme Rules, and Kane's attack would actually sideline Daniel Bryan for a few weeks. In reality, Daniel Bryan's father unfortunately passed away just 2 weeks after WrestleMania 30. Bryan would make his return at Extreme Rules, facing off against Kane in an Extreme Rules match, and this was actually a pretty good match, with Bryan coming out with the win. But unfortunately, the bad news would continue from there. Soon after, he revealed that he was set to undergo neck surgery, meaning he had to relinquish the titles. And later that year, on December 29th, 2014, Daniel Bryan will return on Raw to address his future in wrestling, teasing a retirement before announcing that he was going to be a part of the Royal Rumble, before being confronted by Stephanie McMahon, immediately raining on Bryan's parade and putting him in a match on Smackdown later that Thursday. He would win the match due to disqualification after a J&J security interference, which is how almost every match ended in 2014. He entered the Rumble and was eliminated super early by Bray Wyatt, causing fans to kinda shit on the rest of the match, leading the eventual winner Roman Reigns, who was just cheered to win the Royal Rumble a year before, to be drowned in booze that not even The Rock could save him from, leading WWE to once again have to pivot. Both Daniel Bryan and Roman Reigns would face off in a match at Fastlane to determine who should go off to face the WWE Champion at WrestleMania, with the justification being that Daniel Bryan never actually lost his title. The match was actually pretty good. It was one of Roman Reigns' best matches around this time. 4 out of 5 Don Cheadles. Roman Reigns would pick up the win, and Daniel Bryan would be inserted in a 7-man ladder match for the Intercontinental Championship at WrestleMania. This match was actually pretty fun, and WrestleMania would start the same way it ended last year, with Daniel Bryan winning a championship. And unfortunately, history would repeat itself again. Shortly after, Bryan was pulled from WWE's European tour, and due to injury, he wasn't medically cleared to compete at Extreme Rules. And the following month, he would relinquish the title due to an unknown injury. And fans almost immediately began speculating that the injury may have had something to do with his neck. We wouldn't find out until about 2 months later that the injury was actually concussion related. And after the major scrutiny and backlash WWE received after the Chris Benoit tragedy, especially directed towards their concussion protocol or lack thereof, they started to become a lot more cautious before clearing talent. And we wouldn't see Bryan on television for the remainder of the year. It wasn't until February 8th, 2016, where Bryan would come out on Raw and officially announce his retirement, revealing that it was a bit deeper than a few concussions. Doctors revealed that Bryan suffered from brain lesions, and these would lead to him having post-concussion seizures. He also later revealed that most doctors have cleared him since, but WWE's doctors wouldn't. And it's more so about him being a possible liability to the company. He would remain with the company throughout the years. While appearing in Total Bellas with his wife Brie Bella, you were really able to see how much he loved wrestling and how much being away from the ring was really affecting him. That summer, WWE would host a Cruiserweight Classic, a tournament involving all the greatest cruiserweights in the world, including Kota Ibushi, Zack Sabre Jr., Akira Tozawa, before he was reduced to this. The entire time felt like something special, and Bryan would work as commentator throughout the entire time. The event was won by TJP, And this was probably one of the best things WWE has ever done, until 205 Live. Soon after, he was revealed to be SmackDown's new general manager, and a new era of SmackDown. And 2016 SmackDown was some of the best times. It felt like everybody could be champion, and it felt like the whole roster had a chip on their shoulder. Bryan reignited his feud with The Miz, leading to The Miz cutting the greatest promo of his career.
Why don't you quit and go to the bingo halls with your indie friends then?
And gave his career a bit of a resurgence, as he was pretty stagnant on the mid-card. And this would be his role in WWE for the next 2 years. It wasn't until 2018 in March where WWE would announce that Daniel Bryan was being cleared to compete. And after going out on SmackDown and celebrating with the fans, he would be attacked by Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn. It began with Kevin Owens feuding with SmackDown Commissioner Shane McMahon, with Bryan trying to remain impartial. Months down the line, Sami Zayn would align himself with Kevin Owens by saving him in a Hell in a Cell match versus Shane McMahon, leading both Sami and Kevin to be feuding with the authority of SmackDown, which eventually led to the two being kayfabe fired, leading to the two to snap, attacking Daniel Bryan fresh out of retirement, and building to a match at WrestleMania 34, where Daniel Bryan would make his official in-ring return, teaming up with Shane McMahon, unfortunately. Bryan would then participate in WWE's Greatest Royal Rumble match, a 50-man Royal Rumble match held in Saudi Arabia that nobody asked for. He would end up being in the match for 76 minutes, breaking Rey Mysterio's record for the longest time spent in the Royal Rumble. He was eliminated by Big Cass, and this set up a feud between the two. Cass was recently drafted to SmackDown, and around this time, WWE really saw him as the next big star. However, this feud was actually the beginning of the end for his WWE career. During a segment on SmackDown, Cass would attack a little person dressed as Daniel Bryan. However, he ended up going overboard, attacking him way more than he needed to. This led to a ton of backstage heat on Big Cass, as this was viewed as him going into business for himself. The feud would end up getting cut short, with Daniel Bryan taking a victory at Money in the Bank, and soon after he would reunite with Kane to reform Team Hell No for a few weeks. This coming after a series of attacks from the Bludgeon Brothers. The two teams would face off at Extreme Rules.
Watch so you can see me become the SmackDown Tag Team Champion.
I'm going to become the Tag Team Champions.
No.
With the Bludgeon Brothers taking the win after taking out Kane backstage before the match, essentially turning it into a 2-on-1 handicap match. And the following weeks, Bryan would once again reunite his feud with The Miz, leading to the two facing off at SummerSlam, with The Miz coming out with the win, after the use of some brass knucks. After SummerSlam, Bryan would team up with his wife Brie Bella to face The Miz and his wife Maurice at Hell in a Cell, with The Miz and Maurice picking up a win again. And the feud would culminate with The Miz facing off against Daniel Bryan at Super Showdown in a #1 contenders match for AJ Styles' WWE Championship. Bryan would come out with the win, and he was set to face AJ Styles for the WWE Championship in Saudi Arabia. However, with the tragic and controversial issues going on in Saudi Arabia at the time, Daniel Bryan refused to work the Crown Jewel event. The two then faced off on the October 30th episode of SmackDown, with AJ Styles picking up the win after a pretty good match. 2 weeks later, the two had a rematch, and everything was going fine until the referee got knocked down. And these are two of the greatest wrestlers of all time in the ring. Surely they'll find a way to, oh no, a heel turn! Bryan would hit AJ Styles with a low blow and continue to attack him once the referee came to, picking up the win and becoming the new WWE champion. Also officially turning heel for the first time in 5 years. He began rebranding himself as the new Daniel Bryan, being the eco-friendly Planet's champion. 2 weeks later, he'd face off against Brock Lesnar at Survivor Series in a champion versus champion match, with no title on the line. And the two delivered another 4 out of 5 Don Cheadle classic. Soon after, Bryan would align himself with the returning Eric Rowan, and after successfully defending his title against AJ Styles, soon after he began terrorizing Kofi Kingston and The New Day. After Mustafa Ali had recently been injured by Randy Orton, Kofi Kingston would take his place by entering the Elimination Chamber, almost winning the entire thing. This near victory led fans to really get behind Kofi Kingston, much like they did Daniel Bryan back in 2013. However, this time around, Bryan played the role of the authority, even referring to Kofi as a B+ player. And much like the story with Daniel Bryan, even almost being replaced by Kevin Owens altogether. And this was an actual possibility because Vince McMahon didn't see Kofi Kingston as a main event star. For weeks, Kofi had to fight through insurmountable odds in order to be able to face Daniel Bryan at WrestleMania for the WWE Championship. The final challenge for the New Day was for Xavier Woods and Big E to win a gauntlet match featuring the best tag teams on the roster. And after nearly an hour of facing opponents, they would pick up the win, setting up the match at WrestleMania. And the storytelling in this match was fantastic. And the ending of the match saw Kofi Kingston defeating Daniel Bryan to win the WWE Championship, effectively turning this into Kofi Mania. This ended Bryan's reign at 145 days. The next week after Mania, Bryan and Eric Rowan would win the SmackDown Tag Team Championships, in what was kind of a forgettable reign. They mostly continued their feud with the New Day, with Heavy Machinery also tagging along, and they would end up losing the titles to the New Day in a triple threat tag team match at Extreme Rules. In the following weeks, Bryan and Rowan would begin feuding with Roman Reigns. Roman Reigns would continuously get attacked backstage by a mystery guy, with all evidence pointing towards Eric Rowan being the attacker. And Bryan would constantly defend Eric Rowan, even going as far as to reveal that the attacker was some guy that looked like Eric Rowan. And the two remained best friends until this, oh no, a heel turn! Eric Rowan would turn on Daniel Bryan, and later align himself with Luke Harper, setting up a tag team match between the four at Hell in a Cell, with Bryan and Reigns coming out with the win. Meanwhile, later that night, The Fiend and Seth Rollins would go on to have one of the worst Hell in a Cell matches of all time, leading to the two having a Falls Count Anywhere match at Crown Jewel, where The Fiend would pick up the Universal Championship, leading to The Fiend turning his sights to his good old friend Daniel Bryan at Survivor Series. The Fiend would end up putting Bryan to sleep with a mandible claw. The feud wouldn't end here, as a week later, The Fiend would attack Daniel Bryan once again, this time cutting Bryan's hair. Part of The Fiend's gimmick was, after facing his opponent, they would revert back to their original gimmick. An idea that was actually pretty genius, however, once put to action, it was pretty hard to commit to, especially when trying to do weekly television. The attack led to Daniel Bryan being kayfabe missing, and even his longtime rival The Miz was concerned about his whereabouts. He made his return and we would see the official rebirth of the Yes Movement. It never really went away, but this is when Daniel Bryan officially started using it again. The two would face off at the Royal Rumble, where once again The Fiend would come out with the win. Bryan would return to the mid-card, feuding with and later on teaming up with Drew Gulak. The entire relationship predicated off of Drew Gulak seeing weak points in Bryan's game. The two began feuding against the faction of Cesaro, Shinsuke Nakamura, and Sami Zayn, who held the Intercontinental Championship. This leading to a match at WrestleMania 36, where Bryan would lose to Sami Zayn for the Intercontinental Championship. He later competed in the weirdest Money in the Bank ladder match ever, where superstars, both male and female, started on the first floor of the WWE corporate building, fought all throughout the building to reach the briefcase suspended above the roof. And I may be in a very small group of people that actually like this match, I'm not gonna lie. The match was won by Otis, and this went nowhere for him. The next week, Bryan would enter a tournament for the vacant Intercontinental Championship. He would make it all the way to the finals, facing off against AJ Styles, who was replacing Jeff Hardy, who was kayfabe arrested for hitting Elias with a car. The pandemic era was kind of insane. Bryan would lose to AJ Styles on the June 12th episode of Smackdown, and afterwards, he would take a brief hiatus, this due to he and his wife having their second child. Bryan would return on the October 23rd, 2020 episode of Smackdown, and it was here where he would pretty much announce that this was going to be his last full-time run in WWE. Bryan would declare for the 2021 Royal Rumble, where he would end up being eliminated by Seth Rollins. He then earned a spot in the Elimination Chamber match, where the winner would receive a match for the Universal Championship immediately. And Bryan would end up winning the Elimination Chamber match, just to have to immediately face off against a newly heel Roman Reigns. And Roman Reigns would make quick work of Daniel Bryan. And I believe this is the third time they've done this type of spot. There was one where John Cena won the Elimination Chamber, just to have Vince McMahon come out and announce that Edge was cashing in his Money in the Bank contract. And the other time was John Cena winning the Elimination Chamber match, and Vince McMahon came out to announce that Batista was entitled to a WWE Championship match. I think it works here a lot more with Daniel Bryan than it does with John Cena, and even though I've seen it before, this kind of worked for me. Bryan would end up requesting a rematch from Roman Reigns, and the two would once again face off at Fastlane. However, this time they had a rated R referee. Roman Reigns would pick up the win after Edge attacks both men with a steel chair, and this would set up a triple threat match in the main event of WrestleMania. And after a 4 out of 5 Don Cheadle match, I wouldn't put it on the same level as the triple threat match we just saw at WrestleMania 41. The in-ring work was there, however the build was a bit lackluster. Bryan would continue his feud with Roman Reigns, where 2 weeks later he would face Reigns in a championship versus career match on SmackDown, and Bryan lost to the guillotine that I wish Roman Reigns would do more often. And this would end up being his last match in WWE. It was later revealed that his contract had expired, and the company really pushed to get him back. However, feeling like he had some unfinished business left in the independent scene, as well as the opportunity to help build a company from the ground up, Daniel Bryan couldn't help but see what was out there for him. which is why 4 months later, we use All Out pay-per-view, Bryan Danielson would make his All Elite Wrestling debut, where he went on to possibly have the best run of his career, being treated like a star from start to finish. However, that's a video in itself. Daniel Bryan's WWE career is one that I never would have expected to be this successful. Not necessarily because of his in-ring talent, but because WWE management is notorious for fumbling the ball with stars like him. But one thing I've learned from watching his career is that when you make yourself undeniable, anything can happen.